if y'all heard our presentation this morning from our research team, they talked a lot about how resilience has really been a key topic over the past year that utilities and people in the industry are focusing on. So this is a really important topic, and I'm excited to have this conversation with these panelists. Please welcome to the stage Marie from NV Energy, Abhay Gupta from Bidgely, Erika from Autin Energy, and Adrian from Xcel Energy. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm really excited to chat with you all. So let's just kind of jump right into things. For the utilities on the panel, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing around resilience at your utilities? I know you're all in different types of territories, so Marie, since you're next to me, I'll start with you.
I figured that was going to happen. So, Marie Steele. And so for those of you in the room, I'm from NV Energy, and so that's the investor-owned utility that serves about 90% of the state of Nevada, right? And so when we think of resiliency, there's a whole host of things, especially as a fully integrated utility. In northern Nevada, we obviously have wildfires. In southern Nevada, you have drought, and then you have power supply availability in the west, and then also a massive deployment of distributed energy resources. So it's a whole host of issues. You're really trying to balance to make sure that you can also support growth and safety. And so we really look at it holistically across energy supply, even down to going to the panel before employees. Right? How do you grow this workforce of the future with a really diverse service territory as well? And so we look at it pretty holistically because it really impacts the areas that we serve.
Thanks. And Erika, as our local Austin representative.
Yeah, so I work for Autin Energy, and we are a department of the city. So we're a non-opt-in entity. So for us, resilience it's such a broad topic. Specifically for us as a vertically integrated utility, we have issues with some of our fossil fuel generation that is being retired in our service territory, and it causes problems with load separation, price load separation with the rest of the market. So we have really strong environmental goals, which we're very proud of, but it does cause problems when it comes to managing those prices on the grid. So we look for ways to be able to bring some of that generation back into our service territory, but in ways that is green and that continues to meet some of our goals with regards to our resource plan. So, we look at it in a market as far as the wholesale market is concerned, and how that's going to be able to protect our customers.
I'm Adrian Rodriguez with Southwestern Public Service Company, which is the utility that's serving 400,000 customers in West Texas, primarily the Panhandle and South Plains, into eastern New Mexico. Being part of that service territory, resiliency, we have a high amount of wind that's on our system, but same situation with Autin Energy is you're starting to retire fossil fuel generation systems on your own system. You're having to now really rebalance and think about how you are trying to maintain a base load system for your customers in order to make sure that the lights stay on. You're also evaluating the diversification of new resources that come onto the system. It's no longer just in our area, it was historically wind, but now the integration of more solar that is going to be financially viable. Being also part of a utility that has operating companies across 8 states also means that we get to evaluate from our colleague operating companies some of the challenges that they have and also some of their successes. So I've got a colleague that operates in the Western Interconnection and Public Service Company of Colorado that probably faces many of the same challenges that Marie contends with. And then I've got colleagues that serve the upper Midwest in Minnesota and Wisconsin, which creates very different weather type patterns than I deal with in the Panhandle and eastern New Mexico. Also recognizing that some of us are also in different grids. My colleagues are in the MISO. I happen to be in the Southwest Power Pool, and of course my colleagues in Colorado are in the Western Interconnection. So we really get to evaluate resiliency across different areas of the country.
So you all kind of touched on this a little bit, but I was wondering if you could go a little bit deeper as far as decarbonization goes. You know, so many utilities have these aggressive plans for decarbonization and reaching net zero. So how does decarbonization actually affect your planning processes when it comes to resilience? And Marie, you want to start?
Sorry. So, you know, a huge RPS goal, 50% by 2030, and then also 100% greenhouse gas reductions by 2050. And so we're aggressively going to meet those by 2030, but now we're looking at different issues related to actually having excess solar, right? What do we do with that? And so we now don't install solar without a battery, but now we're looking at long storage duration batteries as well. Talking about the presentation that just happened related to EVs, we're changing our time of use rates related to electric vehicles, such that off-peak is now from midnight to 12 a.m. So we're trying to put that new load where I actually have excess capacity. And also deploying a lot of DR, as well as utilizing batteries in vehicles. And so we have an electric school bus vehicle to grid trial. And so in Southern Nevada, it's the third largest school district in the nation with 2,000 school buses across 5 fleet yards. So I've got about at least 500 megawatts of battery storage capacity there that we're trying to utilize as a grid resource. So we're really looking at it holistically. I have the distributed resource plan, which looks across all of our DER. And so that integrating into our broader integrated resource plan is something we're really aggressively going after, from tariffs, technology, and a whole host, because if we can really flatten that supply curve, we can do it much cheaper and much more resiliency.
Erika?
So we have some pretty aggressive goals as well. We are looking to be carbon-free by 2035. So all of our stack emissions, you know, down to zero. To be able to do that, especially with some of that fossil fuel in my service territory, what I alluded to before, we're looking at trying to really be creative about how we can have our customers kind of help us bridge to that end solution. So a couple of things, you know, we're constantly focused on emerging technology and new ways to be able to meet some of these goals that, you know, still are on the cusp or on the horizon, right? We also we launched a resiliency as a service program, which allows me to at least access these assets. Basically your Enchanted Rock model that is outside of my service territory, but we're Enchanted Rock. And so this allows me to be able to have that price protection or access those assets to be able to provide that price protection, but it's still a customer-driven program. And, you know, again, using natural gas as a bridge until I can get to a place where I can be fully carbon-free, you know, and completely shut those units down. So really trying to be creative about how we approach that goal, and constantly taking a pulse of the market and trying to help develop those technologies, so then we can meet those ultimate goals.
Adrian?
So one of the things similar to all of my colleague investor-owned utilities and municipal utilities, we've got aggressive carbon goals, and in fact, Xcel Energy, even prior to my time with the company, had announced aggressive net zero goals by as far as 2050. We even have the unique aspect of having to contend with the states in which we operate. So I have one system across 2 states with arguably different perspectives on energy transition. New Mexico has an Energy Transition Act with aggressive goals, which right now Southwestern Public Service Company is exceeding in the state. But you have to balance that one system with Texas, which is now looking at resiliency as a key factor. There's pending legislation in the state that is being considered that would actually focus on resiliency. It goes to much of the conversation, it's a very much an and not an or, in which we're looking at the customer-sided solutions, especially from my colleague operating companies that have much more metropolitan concentrations than I happen to have in West Texas and Southern New Mexico. Working with very large commercial customers who have their own goals that we're trying to help them bridge as well. So resiliency is a conversation with large commercial customers, primarily in my part of the service territory, but balancing it with the regulation and influences and factors of 2 states that agree in many cases, but in other instances have different views of what resiliency and decarbonization looks like.
And Abhay, let's get you in on this conversation. From the vendor perspective, what are you seeing in utilities that you work with? How are you seeing decarbonization affect their planning?
Absolutely, thank you, Erin. Abhay Gupta, founder and CEO at Bidgely. And just a quick word, just so people, we are about 13 years old in the industry. We are serving about 35 large utilities in North America and some international. Marie has been one of our partners for many years. And so to answer your question, what are we seeing? I describe the same problem in a slightly different words. I see that this whole fossil fuel plants going away and the decarbonization basically makes your supply curve flat. Instead of flat, which used to be flat because of the fossil fuel plants, now it's based on the solar and wind, it's no longer flat. So supply curve, which could follow the demand in past with either peaker plants or something, is not possible. It has its own mind, which is based on weather. On the other side, the demand curve is changing very fast with the EVs and batteries, and so now you have supply and demand curve both have their own minds, and very fast as the adoption of these things go higher, maybe in 3 to 5 years, you're going to be completely out of sync between supply and demand curve, and that's no different than what we call resiliency, right? How do we bring them in sync with each other? So that's how I see the picture. And you can't change the supply. You can store it, but that's pretty expensive. So now comes the customer into picture, and how do we use the customer assets and shift the demand to meet the supply? And that's how we are creating solutions to have the demand shift to meet the supply. So that's the high level.
Thank you. Did you have something else?
No, I was just saying, I think there is a Bidgely introduction video which we could play at some point for people to know what we do and how we actually meet those requirements for the utilities.
Okay.
So we can play it right now.
Yeah, I see Sarah in the back.
What does it take to keep the lights on? As weather becomes more extreme, more EVs hit the road, and renewable energy replaces coal, how do we keep energy flowing? It takes much more than poles and wires. It takes each of us, a global community of energy users, empowered to make smart energy decisions. It all starts behind the meter, where Bidgely's advanced utility AI transforms data about how energy is being used into energy intelligence that makes grids work better. Who's charging an EV? When are appliances running and how are they performing? How much solar energy is being generated and stored? Utility AI creates personalized insights to help people learn how to conserve, shift their usage, and help supply more clean energy. It also empowers utilities with a household-level view of how energy is flowing on their grids so they can manage the grid home by home and community by community, from the meter up rather than the transformer down, preventing outages and reliably meeting energy demand no matter how much it grows. It all starts behind the meter, with utilities and people empowered to do their part, working together to keep the lights on and build the grid of the future.
Look, all marketing videos look pretty. One thing I would say take home is behind the meter. How do you know what's happening in the home? If you can figure out who has battery, who has an EV, when are they charging, who has solar, etc., I think we can do a lot more, and that's what our contribution is to the industry. Figuring out what's happening in the home, behind the meter, without actually going inside the home, using the meter data analytics. And hopefully we get time through the conversation here to go one layer deeper to figure out what we can do to shift the demand in a cost-effective and scalable manner, but that's good. Let's continue.
Thank you. Erika, I'll start with you on this one because you mentioned that you guys have a big focus on emerging technologies. So what kinds of new technologies are you looking at to help you plan for resiliency?
I can't tell you. It's all confidential. No, I mean, really, with the IRA coming out and with, you know, kind of exciting things that everybody, you know, knows, whether it's hydrogen or, you know, P2X, and, you know, we have a biomass plant that's become extremely popular in the last year and was, you know, extremely unpopular for the first decade of its life. You know, we are entertaining a lot of, you know, just interesting discussions, you know, from people all over the planet that, you know, can really invest in these assets. So we want to be part of that solution, and really trying to find the way a integrated utility like ours can be part of that solution is really our role, right? There's going to be things that is not appropriate for us to be a part of, but there's other things that we can, and so just trying to, you know, kind of wade through that. There's, you know, there's a lot of interest out there, so.
Adrian, what about you? Are you guys looking at new techs and services?
Absolutely, not just at Southwestern Public Service Company, but around the country. As I noted, the other operating companies provide us opportunities to share that information. But I want to highlight something that we noted out of the video, and that we talk a lot about new technology. There's a lot of technology that is still being rolled out over the course of the last decades that enables this new technology, which many customers around the country still do not have. For example, that's advanced metering infrastructure on the distribution system. Utilities, mine included at this point in time, do not have the field area networks or the what have historically been called either smart meters or AMI on their homes. It was something that was done, at least for those of you that I know were here in Austin, and that happened in the ERCOT grid back in around 2005 to 2010. And about 60% of the country now has advanced metering infrastructure, but think about that 40% that does not. So the technology that you see, the ability to have that visibility into a customer's home is enabled by that field area network and that smart meter infrastructure that is barely being rolled out in many parts of the country, mine specific included. We just started installing our first smart meters in Texas over the course of the last couple of weeks. So noting that this is the subject of regulation, financing, depending on what part of the country you're in. The electric utilities in New Mexico, again, where I also do business, still have not rolled out advanced metering infrastructure yet. So we are talking about looking at what's happening on the emergent part of the network, and we definitely all want that. And we're talking to our colleague industries and our colleagues in the industry about it. But we're still catching up in some cases. So you're always going to see bits of these fits and starts with trying to get to the technology and the new cutting edge innovation because you're of that lag that's inherent to some extent within our industry that we're trying to overcome.
You know, one thing I'll add to that is, you know, I talked previously just about kind of these large utility scale type assets and opportunities that, you know, we're looking at to be able to meet our goals, these, you know, the 2035 carbon-free goals. But, you know, we're also, you know, same exact time, very focused on, you know, some of the smaller, and when I say that, again, we're starting to look much more inside of our service territory, starting to roll out looking at really rolling out at DERMS now that seems to have become more mature in the market. And our RAS program, which I mentioned earlier, we're looking at not only in front of the meter but behind the meter to be able to add value to our portfolio and reduce that load where we can. So it's the big stuff and it's the small stuff as well, because it's just as important and it adds value. So I just remember, you know, through AMI, we've actually, that's very mature for us, but, you know, there's still a lot to be done with our demand response and, you know, the behind the meter type energy efficiency work.
And Marie, what about you all at NV Energy?
I mean, it's definitely all hands on deck, right? And especially, you know, sitting here in Texas and Nevada as well, the growth we're experiencing too, right? So you're trying to balance resiliency with meeting the economic growth of the cities and entities in which you live and serve, right? And so we're very fortunate we're at a point where we're actually reinvesting in our AMI, right? We've had it for so long. And it going from a demand response management system to an advanced terms that we're developing with Oracle that'll have a fully integrated system of systems with our billing and distribution system, right? So we're really looking at a world where our customers are a part of the solution, right? We've got transmission development. We are looking at all sorts of generation, right? But also distribution assets on the system, in front of the meter, behind the meter. Or we have a DOE grid grant right now on grid services related to energy storage as a service, right? How many batteries can we install at all of our substation? And then our customers that have solar can then utilize that battery rather than having to do it inside of their own garage. So we're really transitioning to an energy services department versus customer programs, right? We're trying to break away from that, from this holistic approach. So all of the DER behind the meter, in front of the meter, where the utility can own and operate that asset, that it assumes a generation profile versus not having to plan for it, is really something we're aggressively going after as well. Because really the reality is at summer we have about 3x our peak, right? And so we have a ton of excess capacity that if we can move that load, that's really the objective we're going after. So.
And Abhay, kind of going further into the data discussion, like you mentioned, how can utilities sort of best extract this data? Like, what's maybe the most important ones? And then for a utility like Adrian's, where they're going to be having all kinds of new data from rolling out these services, how can they kind of manage that?
Yes. So I would certainly acknowledge it. I think different utilities are in different phases of their own infrastructure development. Infrastructure is very important. So initially the focus is on infrastructure, making sure your AMI, your network is laid out. But once you have done that, then the focus for most utilities who've sort of spent the time on the infrastructure, and literally we're talking about hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars, the focus goes on what do I do with this infrastructure other than meter reading and rolling out special rates, right? This is where the data comes into picture. You are generally extracting a lot of data from the grid at meter level, latest meters at 15 minutes, even 5-minute interval, from your SCADA, it's even seconds. What do you do with this data is where we come into picture. And starting with the data, so I'll give a few examples. That's what I meant by let's go one layer deep. How can we use the data both at the customer side and on the grid side? Now, I think it's universally accepted that in the future, few years out, your customer is not going to be separate from the grid because all the assets in the home are being used to manage the grid, right? I'm hoping that that's not a contestable assumption, right?
Working towards it.
Okay. So what do we do? So first of all, on the customer side, it's going to get complex. You buy an electric vehicle, and I think the rate of electric vehicle purchase is very high. I think last year, 10% of the new vehicles sold were EVs. 100 new EV models were introduced last year. That's coming very fast. So when I buy an EV, the first thing that happens is, like Marie said, there is an EV time of use rate because you want me to charge in a certain time period. And of course, that varies. In California, that period ends at 6 a.m. Marie would take it to 12 p.m. because she wants to use the solar to some extent. So as a consumer, when I go to time of use rate, hold on, the difference between peak and off peak is much bigger. Previously, it used to be like 5 cents and 10 cents, or maybe 5 and 8 cents, or 10 and 12 cents. In California, which is extreme, it's 12 and 48 cents. Okay, 48 cents per kilowatt hour. But hold on, my dryer and my dishwasher is also going to run at 48 cents between 4 p.m. and 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. Now that's a problem because all my appliances in those peak hours are running at 4x the energy cost. So my life became more complicated as a consumer. Who's going to help me out? Then if I think about putting solar on my roof, wait, there's a solar feed-in tariff. Do I charge my car when Marie's telling me in those hours, or do I charge my car when solar is producing energy? That depends on my feed-in tariff. And then if I put battery, it gets more complicated. And maybe you can save me from putting the battery by giving me a community grade battery. So life is not going to be easy for consumer. It's going to get very complicated. And then on top of that, we are talking about dynamic rate plans to shift the load in those times when you have enough of those DERs adopted, right? So consumer is going to need a lot of help, and that's who are they going to look towards? They're going to look towards you, right? They're not going to go outside, and you don't want them to go outside because you don't want they are your customers. You want them to be supported by you. So that's the step number one. Second part comes in, how do I use those consumers to be behaving in a way where it's directly contributing to the resiliency of the grid? So this is where the grid planning comes into picture, knowing who has EV, when are they charging, how big is the EV, is it level 1? And I think everything is going to move towards level 2. Level 1 doesn't make sense in future. When are they charging, where are they charging, do they have solar? having that information without having to ask them is extremely important in your own planning purposes, right? And these things are mobile loads. Sometimes they're charging here, there. It's a long weekend. All of a sudden, everybody's charging for the long trip. So knowing all of this behind the meter technology, using your own data is critical in your distribution, grid planning, and long-term stuff. So when do I upgrade this substation, this feeder circuit, etc., is critical because the adoption of EV is not uniform across your entire population. So I think the planning and then ability to know where am I shifting the load, do I have non-wire alternative juice in my circuit because there is a lot of shiftable load. So I do that instead of upgrading my asset. All of these are real life decisions which are expensive. So knowing behind the meter on the grid side as well as the customer side is going to be critical in the future of the grid.
Can I just add on to it? So we've had Bidgely for a long time, and so from my perspective, I have the customer programs under my purview and then also planning for them as well. And so from a planning perspective, we're required. It felt like a requirement before, right, that we needed to plan per asset down to the feeder level, right? So how do you do this DER forecasting? And we bought static studies before, right? And that requirement became in 2017. But now this mass proliferation of DER, EV, storage, solar, and all other controllable things, having to be able to see that and feed our load forecast that then feeds into our supply has been incredibly helpful, right? And so it's very insightful from that data to inform your distribution planning and your integrated grid planning. But then take it all the way to the other side. Energy prices are expensive right now, right? Everyone's getting the why are my bills so high question, right? And having that load disaggregation in our call centers, when our energy advisors go into their homes, that they can see what it is per type of appliance, or it can be your EV. Having that data also for your customers is a huge component of customer satisfaction right now. And Adrian had talked about it. It's very interesting where people have lived somewhere and had it and moved somewhere where they don't, to not have access to that data. Almost, it just doesn't feel right anymore, right? It's an expectation from our customers that we can give them so much more information. And it's super helpful going into the summers that we've been having lately related to natural gas prices, right? That we're just seeing higher prices of why is it more, but we're using the same. Has really been helpful to have that tool to help our customers better understand their usage.
As far as customer engagement goes, are you all communicating more with your customers, like specifically around resilience? Are they asking those kinds of questions? Adrian?
So I'll start. Again, we're in Texas for this conference, and we are all aware about the national news related to the Winter Storm Uri from 2021. We get into details, especially where I happen to be, and this is just kind of a look at customers in my service territory who live in Texas, who ask a lot of questions about the Texas grid. And so part of that communication is they actually probably learn a little bit more about grids than they ever thought they were going to learn, because our conversations at Southwestern Public Service Company are that we are in the Southwest Power Pool. As the Western Interconnection, at NV Energy, you all are talking about whether an ISO or a regional transmission operator makes sense in the Western Interconnection. I'm the one utility in New Mexico that is not part of the Western Interconnection. So that conversation with our customers when they're asking about what my colleagues at PNM or El Paso Electric or what life is like in those service territories, we have to have this conversation with them about an aspect of the energy industry that you really didn't think you were going to have with customers, but that because of what is on the forefront of their minds, whether it's a national news story related to grids, they're asking questions about it. And then it goes into the next level about, well, what about specific to my neighborhood? So you end up with a lot of sophisticated questions from customers that are residential customers that normally would not have thought about this. And to the point about gas prices going up, our call centers are getting a lot of those questions and being armed with that information and letting folks know about why their bills are different this year versus a year before when they use the same amount of energy answers a lot of that question. And it is something that the real-time information is going to enable and empower our customers to be able to ask these questions and even on the affordability aspect. If somebody is on a fixed income, but they do happen to have this information, they may be able to start changing behaviors that could impact their bills later in the month, whereas maybe they don't necessarily have that data at the beginning of the month and can't make those decisions until after the bill is there. So customers are asking sophisticated questions. Part of it is that we're just maybe more attuned to energy right now, but as a general matter, because so many customers now have real-time information from other parts of the country, they're expecting it in almost every part of the country.
Yeah, and I would say it's a foregone conclusion here in Austin as far as resiliency is concerned, that's something that we're paying attention to, and our customers are very focused on. We have a chief resiliency officer that was hired, or actually it was created about a year and a half ago, and they're doing great work, that team, to create resiliency hubs around the city. And as the utility, it's we're focused on connecting with them or working with them to create these hubs, as well as provide resiliency for other parts of our system. So whether it's our water, Austin Water, helping our airport, as well as critical infrastructure. So our grocery stores and other types of services can be there for our customers. So this is something that we're really focused on trying to provide this strength and this idea that we are there for our customer and we will be there for them, meeting their needs. So it is something that our customers are focused on, and it's something that Mother Nature hasn't been very kind to us, but we're reaching out to every part of our community to be able to make sure that we know what they need and that we can provide it.
I'll just add on to that quickly. So obviously out in the West, and we're a broader part of Berkshire Hathaway Energy utility, so have a big partnership in the same collaboration that Xcel has as well. But in Nevada, we have a natural disaster plan protection program, right? How do we protect against some of the issues, wildfires in the north, and then certainly energy events in the south related to just the temperatures that are rising. And so it's definitely been a part of our community that over the past 5 years, people are just getting much more sophisticated about it. We also happen to serve the Las Vegas Strip that is not interested in not having power on the hottest day of the summer or during their holiday season, right? And so managing that complexity as well is interesting. And then another component too is a lot of our decarbonization strategies and sustainability strategies in the desert Southwest is related to water conservation. And a lot of your water conservation issues generally mean increasing energy consumption when you think of evaporative cooling and things like that. And so how do we continue to provide that power? One of the things though from a resiliency center that Erika hit on that we're really focusing on is how do we use actually buses to provide additional backup power to these buildings, and working with our government agencies to identify certain ones actually where we can pre-build out microgrids with stationary V2G chargers that we can keep just making, driving up either school buses or transit buses and working to utilize these assets just more, right? Pricing out resiliency. How do we help buy down the assets related to buses? So it's it's actually been a good thing for the community to work on it together, right? As we face just the evolving climate changes. So.
Abhay, do you have thoughts on customer engagement in terms of resilience?
I think I'll continue the theme from past. Customer is going to be a very important part of your resiliency. You can't just build in resiliency. It's too expensive to build it without customer being involved. And things will evolve. Like for example, right now, introducing a time of use rate for EV is the first level of solution. But pretty soon when you have enough cars on the road, there'll be a new peak at midnight. And I think everybody knows that. So I would say this is a poor man's solution today, to have a time of use rate which is same for everybody. And once you have enough adoption of these DERs, it will evolve into the next stage where you have to go beyond that. And there are technologies being developed. I think the technologies are keeping the pace up, foreseeing the problems that will come. But we just have to realize there is a solution for today, and there's a solution for a scaled version of the DERs where both these new peaks as well as the, I would say, affordability. Today's solutions offer a few $100s to a customer to say, give me your car access, I will manage it. But when you have 1 million cars, you can't just hand out $300 per car. That's a lot of money. And by the way, only 10% of them actually cause the congestion. It's not like every car causes the congestion. So scalability includes targeting, knowing what's happening, which car, which asset is contributing to the congestion or which can actually offset the congestion. And these solutions, which today are rate plans, will evolve into more dynamic solutions, which means combination of rate plans and dynamic control, dynamic prices. So we as technology vendors are keeping up with the pace of, because you have to develop solutions a few years ahead and test them in the field. You can't just have the solution ready when you actually need it. So we are keeping up the pace with what's needed for today and what's needed for the scaled version of the resiliency when you have a lot more adoption of the DERs on the grid.
All right, we've got a few minutes left. I have some more questions, but I wanted to open it up to the audience to see if we have any audience questions. There's one right back there.
Hi, Dave Irwin. I'm with the U.S. Army. As we've discussed, resilience means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Part of what our job is to help the Army figure out how to balance that tension between increased cost, right, or cost neutrality, resilience, which we would call, operational continuity, and the mandate for us to adopt carbon-free energy across our portfolio 100% by 2030, which is much sooner than a lot of the 2050 goals that some of you have stated, as well as various other utilities. How can large industrial commercial customers such as us, right, plus Amazon and Google, et cetera, who have those same kinds of concerns, right? They don't want downtime, they want to contain cost, and they want to push towards a carbon-free environment. How do we best work with utilities? And then how do utilities best work with us, right? We're moving to all light-duty vehicles will be EVs or chargeable in the next 5 years, assuming GSA can procure that many cars, right? Having another logistical issue. We were talking to a utility not too long ago. They think that they have probably 150, 175 EVs in their territory, right? They're not a particularly large territory. And when we talked to them and said, hey, well, we're probably going to bring on 2,500 cars in the next 5 years, what do you think about that? Their jaw dropped, right? So how do we better enable conversations so that we can maximize the value to both parties?
I'll start with that one because we have a heavy commercial and industrial use in my service territory, and at prior experience is worked closely with the United States Army and the United States Air Force on meeting their energy needs. I think a key part of that conversation is the engagement, but also recognizing that there's engagement at the state level, or for purposes of a municipal utility at their city councils. The policy isn't just going to be primarily with the utility, it's also going to be engaging some of the policymakers, like, for example, for my purposes in Texas, the Public Utility Commission of Texas, in New Mexico, the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, where we go in, and if there's a challenge that we're trying to address, we go to the regulator together. In many cases, it's because the structure of the statute, the structure of the municipal policy is not reflecting what you as a large commercial and industrial customer need for resiliency, and it's not something that the utility may be able to provide under its current construct. But that partnership goes and lets the regulator know. It may even require statutory or policy changes to ordinances that a customer needs it, a customer wants it, the utility wants to provide it. It can accentuate the benefits of the system for remaining customers who aren't going to directly benefit from that particular program, and that they're willing then to either create a pilot program or create a modification of the program. But that partnership is key to be able to find a solution, especially when there's either a statutory or ordinance that's maybe challenging the ability to move forward on that program.
Anyone else want to add anything to that? All right. Well, we are just about out of time. It's lunchtime, so if anyone else has questions for the panelists, you can hopefully find them at lunch. And thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to the panel. Please join me in a round of applause for our panel.